Racist cop arrested his black girlfriend. The reason will shock you. Imagine falling in love with someone who promises to support your dreams and stand by your side, only to one day find yourself handcuffed by that very person. Meet Olivia, a passionate advocate for justice, whose relationship with Joshua, a police officer, spirals into an unexpected nightmare. In a single shocking moment, the man she trusted uses his authority to humiliate her, leaving her questioning everything she once believed. But Olivia's journey doesn't end in despair. Follow her incredible transformation as she reclaims her voice, rebuilds her strength, and turns betrayal into a powerful purpose. If this is your first time here on our channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our amazing stories. Now, let's jump into the full story. Olivia leaned against the kitchen counter, her mind swirling with thoughts as she watched the steam rise from her cup of tea. Joshua, her boyfriend of 2 years, was still at the table, scrolling through his phone with a furrowed brow. Their conversation from earlier lingered in the air, heavy and unresolved. It wasn't the first time they discussed racial issues. Olivia was deeply passionate about social justice and often attended events and protests advocating for equality. Joshua, on the other hand, was a dedicated police officer who believed firmly in law and order, often struggling to see things from her perspective. Tonight's argument had been different, though. It had been sharper, harsher. A news story about another police confrontation had sparked a conversation that turned personal, forcing both of them to defend not just their beliefs, but their identities. Olivia could feel the unspoken tensions simmering just beneath the surface. She glanced at him, hoping he might break the silence with an apology or even a small gesture that hinted he understood her side. But Joshua only looked up with a blank expression, as if the argument hadn't affected him at all. Taking a deep breath, Olivia decided to address the silence. "Josh," she began softly, trying to keep her tone steady, "I feel like you're not hearing me. Every time I try to talk about things that matter to me, especially things like this, you seem so distant. I just want you to understand where I'm coming from." Joshua sighed, placing his phone down and finally looking at her. "Liv, I get that this is important to you, but you have to understand that my job is to enforce the law. Every day, I put my life on the line for the safety of others. When you say things that make my work sound like it's part of the problem, it hurts." She knew his work was challenging, even dangerous, and she respected that. But his defensiveness felt like a wall she couldn't break through. "I'm not blaming you, Josh. I'm just saying that things are complicated. You can love your job and still see that there's a problem, that changes need to be made." His gaze shifted, hardening slightly. "You don't understand, Olivia. Sometimes you're too idealistic about these things. Not everything is about race, you know? Sometimes people just make bad choices, and the police have to step in." Olivia felt her stomach tighten. She'd heard these words from him before, but tonight they stung in a way they hadn't before. "I get that you have a perspective based on your job, but you're my boyfriend, too. I need you to see me, to listen to me." Joshua's jaw tightened, and for a moment, it seemed like he was going to say something meaningful. But then he shook his head and muttered, "Maybe you're just not seeing things clearly." The words cut deep, leaving Olivia speechless. She blinked back the hurt, suddenly unsure of how to respond. Silence filled the room once again, heavy and unsettling. She realized, for the first time, that perhaps they weren't as aligned as she'd believed. The days that followed their argument felt tense and brittle, like a fragile glass on the edge of shattering. Olivia tried to shake off the lingering hurt, reminding herself that every couple has disagreements, especially on difficult topics. But the rift between her and Joshua seemed deeper, almost intangible, something she couldn't quite place yet couldn't ignore. She found herself replaying the conversation, dissecting his words in her mind. Joshua's indifference, his subtle dismissal of her feelings. It all gnawed at her, a quiet ache that she carried throughout her days. It wasn't that she expected him to agree with everything she believed, but she longed for him to acknowledge her perspective, to show some empathy. One evening, as they sat across from each other at dinner, Olivia tried again. "Joshua," she began, choosing her words carefully, "I know we come from different backgrounds, and maybe we see the world differently because of that. But I need to know that you respect my experiences, my point of view. Joshua looked up from his plate, his fork suspended midair. I do respect you, Liv, he replied, though his tone lacked warmth. But you have to understand, my job isn't easy. I see things every day that you'd never understand. Things that make me question humanity sometimes. And when you talk about cops like we're all villains, it feels like a slap in the face. I'm not saying that, Olivia replied, her voice strained but calm. I know your work is tough, and I admire that. But can't you also acknowledge that there are real issues, that some people are treated unfairly just because of who they are? Joshua's expression hardened. You're talking about things you don't understand. You see one side of it, but I'm the one who's out there on the streets, risking my life. Not every cop is the enemy, Olivia. I'm not saying every cop is the enemy, she said, frustration creeping into her tone. But I am saying that sometimes the system fails people and we can't ignore that. He shook his head, returning to his food as if the conversation were already over. Olivia's heart sank. Every attempt she made to reach him, to find some common ground, seemed to slide off him like water on glass. It was as if he had wrapped himself in an impenetrable layer of resolve, one she couldn't break through. The rest of dinner passed in silence, the clinking of utensils filling the void between them. Afterward, Joshua excused himself, saying he had an early shift the next day. Olivia watched him go, a hollow ache settling in her chest. Alone in her apartment, Olivia wondered if love could survive without understanding. She had always believed that, with enough patience and compassion, any two people could bridge their differences. But tonight that belief wavered. Joshua's walls were high, built from years of defending a world she couldn't fully grasp, and each attempt to bring him closer only seemed to push him further away. She wanted to hold onto the image she had of them, a couple bound by love and trust. But doubts crept in, whispering that perhaps the distance between them was greater than she'd allowed herself to admit. And for the first time, Olivia felt the quiet, nagging fear that this rift between them might be too wide to cross. Days turned into weeks, yet the distance between Olivia and Joshua seemed to grow with each passing moment. The easy laughter they once shared, the simple gestures of affection, all of it felt strained, like a fragile thread stretched to its breaking point. Olivia could sense something lurking just beneath the surface, something she couldn't name but felt deeply in every interaction. Joshua's attitude had shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. Little things that she used to overlook now felt glaringly obvious, as if someone had turned up the contrast in her life with him. He'd always been protective, always had a strong sense of authority that she found both comforting and admirable. But now, his protectiveness felt more like control, especially when he made comments about her friends, her work, and even her social activities. One Friday evening, as she prepared to go out with her friends, Joshua voiced his concerns more pointedly than before. "Are you really going to that protest again?" he asked, his tone filled with disapproval. "You know it's not safe out there, Liv. Things can escalate quickly, and I don't want you caught in the middle of it." Olivia felt her defenses rise. "Joshua, I've been going to these protests for years, even before we met. They're peaceful. Besides, this is important to me, you know that." "I just think it's a bad idea," he muttered, his eyes hardening as he looked away. "Those things attract trouble, and I don't want you to get hurt." She knew he was worried, but something about the way he dismissed her choice felt wrong. "I appreciate your concern, but this is something I'm passionate about." "I can take care of myself," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. His jaw tightened, and he nodded stiffly. "Fine. Do what you want, but don't say I didn't warn you if things go south." The words stung, but she brushed them off, trying to enjoy her night out. However, as she walked away, a nagging thought lingered in her mind. Joshua wasn't just worried, he was judging her, placing himself in a position of authority over her choices, as if he knew better than she did. This wasn't the Joshua she'd fallen in love with, the man who had always respected her independence. Later that night, as she sat with her friends, Olivia's mind wandered back to their conversation. She couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest. Her friends noticed her distraction, and one of them, Mia, leaned over, her brow furrowed in concern. "Hey, Liv, everything okay?" Mia asked gently. Olivia forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, just relationship stuff, you know?" Mia nodded knowingly. "If you ever need to talk, we're here. Sometimes it helps to get an outside perspective." Olivia nodded, feeling grateful but unsure of how to express the growing confusion inside her. How could she explain that the man she loved seemed to be slipping away from her? That his worry now felt like control, his love like a weight pressing down on her? How could she admit that she was beginning to question if he really understood her at all? As she sat there, surrounded by her friends but feeling entirely alone, Olivia realized that the trust she once held so tightly was beginning to erode. And in its place, confusion and doubt had started to take root, whispering questions she was afraid to answer. The following week, Olivia decided to attend a protest that had been planned for months. She'd been looking forward to it, seeing it as a chance to stand in solidarity with others who shared her values and beliefs. Joshua, however, seemed less than supportive, and their last conversation still lingered heavily between them. She hadn't told him she'd be going, partly because she dreaded his reaction and partly because a part of her hoped he might ask and show some genuine interest or concern. That evening, as she got ready, Olivia noticed her phone buzzing. Joshua was calling. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach, but she answered, attempting to sound casual. "Hey, Joshua," she greeted him, keeping her tone light. "Hey, Liv, are you busy tonight?" His voice held a hint of expectation, and Olivia hesitated. Actually, I'm heading out with some friends," she replied, choosing her words carefully. "Out with friends? Or one of those protests again?" His voice was flat, almost accusatory. Olivia felt her patience waning. "Yes, it's a protest. But it's peaceful, Josh. You know I'm careful. This isn't just something I do on a whim. It's important to me." Joshua let out a slow sigh, and she could hear the disapproval radiating through the phone. "Look, Olivia, I get that you care about this stuff, but you're putting yourself in unnecessary danger. Do you really want to be mixed up in that crowd? Do you even know what kind of people go to these things?" "What kind of people?" she shot back, surprised at the edge in her own voice. "They're people like me, people who care about justice and want change. I'm not some reckless child, Joshua. I can handle myself." There was a pause on the other end, and then his tone shifted, colder than before. "Well, don't expect me to come to your rescue if something goes wrong. This isn't a game, Olivia. I just hope you know what you're doing." His words stung. She'd wanted support, empathy, maybe even a bit of encouragement. Instead, she felt belittled, as though her choice to stand up for something meaningful was foolish or naive in his eyes. Fighting the rising frustration, she forced herself to stay calm. "I don't need rescuing, Joshua. I need you to trust me," she replied softly, hoping to ease the tension. "Fine," he said shortly, and without another word, he hung up. Olivia stood there, holding her phone and staring at the screen, the call already disconnected. Her heart ached. She had always believed that relationships were built on trust, that her partner would stand by her even when their views didn't align perfectly. But tonight, it was clear that Joshua didn't see it that way. To him, her choices were simply irresponsible, unworthy of his support or understanding. Later, as she joined her friends at the protest, she couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. The crowd was filled with passionate people, voices raised in unity, but Olivia felt disconnected. Joshua's words echoed in her mind, making her question herself in a way she never had before. As chants filled the air and banners waved, Olivia's heart wasn't fully present. She realized with a pang of sadness that the joy and purpose she usually felt at these events had been tainted by doubt, the seeds of which Joshua had planted with his words. And as she looked around at the faces of strangers united for a common cause, she felt a hollow emptiness, realizing that the man she loved might never understand her, not in the way she truly needed him to. The next day, Olivia could still feel the residue of the protest lingering within her, the energy, the power of standing up for something that mattered. But the memory of Joshua's harsh words cast a shadow over her sense of accomplishment. She spent the morning trying to shake it off, telling herself she wouldn't let it affect her. But deep down, she knew she couldn't keep ignoring the growing tension between them. Later that evening, she decided to talk to him. She wanted to bridge the divide, to somehow make him understand why these issues meant so much to her. But when she arrived at Joshua's apartment, his expression was cold, and she could sense the distance immediately. "So, did you have fun yesterday?" he asked flatly as she walked in, not bothering to mask his disapproval. Olivia took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I did, actually. It was a powerful experience, Joshua. I wish you could understand that." Joshua rolled his eyes. "Powerful? Olivia, those things are dangerous, and half the people there don't even know what they're protesting for. It's just a crowd of people shouting and holding signs, thinking they're changing the world." The words stung, and Olivia felt her frustration building. "You think they don't know what they're protesting for? Joshua, these people are fighting for justice, for change. They're out there because they want a better future." He crossed his arms, his gaze hard. "And do you really believe standing in a crowd is going to make any difference? Real change doesn't happen from shouting in the streets, Olivia. It happens through hard work, through people doing their jobs and following the law." She clenched her fists, trying to keep her voice steady. "But what if the laws are unfair? What if the system is flawed? Joshua, don't you see that some people don't get justice just because of who they are?" Joshua shook his head, his expression unmoved. "You're talking in circles, Olivia. You don't get it. You're looking at this like some kind of idealistic crusade. But out there," he gestured vaguely, as though the outside world were some distant place, "it's different. People make mistakes. Sometimes the wrong choices lead to consequences, and that's not the system's fault." Olivia felt her heart pounding. "So you're saying that it's people's fault when they're treated unfairly? That they deserve it?" "I'm saying that people need to take responsibility for their actions. And sometimes they don't, and they blame the police instead," he replied, his voice unwavering. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with unspoken resentment. Olivia looked at him, really looked at him, and suddenly felt like she didn't know him at all. The man standing before her seemed foreign, unyielding in a way that left her feeling deeply alone. "Joshua," she said quietly, her voice shaking, "do you even believe in the things I stand for? Do you understand why this matters to me?" His expression softened for a moment, but only briefly. "I just don't see why you need to get involved in all of it, Liv. You're not out there every day, you don't see the things I see. Maybe if you did, you'd understand that life isn't so black and white." She felt a tear slip down her cheek, quickly wiping it away. "So that's it then? You don't trust me to make my own choices? To fight for what I believe in?" Joshua looked away, unwilling to answer, and in that silence, Olivia's heart sank. She realized that this wasn't just about a protest or a difference of opinion. It was about something deeper, a fundamental rift between them that couldn't be bridged by words. Without another word, she turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. As she left his apartment, Olivia knew that their love was on the verge of breaking, stretched too thin by the weight of everything they could not agree on. And as much as she wanted to hold on to him, she wasn't sure she could. The following day, Olivia felt a weight pressing down on her, a lingering heaviness that she couldn't shake. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the argument with Joshua over and over again. She kept wondering if there was something she could have said differently, a way to make him understand her perspective without it turning into a fight. She wasn't ready to give up on them, not yet. She still loved Joshua, and part of her hoped that he could see things from her side if she just tried one more time. With that thought, she picked up her phone and sent him a message. "Can we talk? I don't want to leave things the way we did." A few minutes later, her phone vibrated with his response. "Come over tonight. Let's talk." The day dragged on as Olivia waited for the evening to arrive. When she finally made her way to Joshua's apartment, her heart pounded with a mixture of hope and apprehension. She was determined to have an open, honest conversation, one that would hopefully bring them closer rather than drive them further apart. When she walked in, Joshua was already waiting for her, seated on the couch with a thoughtful expression. He looked up as she entered, and for a brief moment, she saw a flicker of the man she fell in love with, vulnerable, kind, and caring. She held onto that image as she sat down across from him. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly, his gaze focused on her. "I wanted to talk things through," Olivia replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't want us to keep drifting apart, Joshua. I love you, and I want to make this work. But we need to understand each other if we're going to move forward." Joshua nodded, his face softening a little. "I know, Liv. I'm sorry if I came off harsh yesterday. It's just, my job isn't easy, and sometimes I feel like no one understands what I go through." "I understand that your work is difficult," Olivia said gently, "and I respect what you do. But I also need you to respect the things that matter to me. This isn't just a phase or a hobby. It's something that's part of who I am, and I need you to see that." Joshua took a deep breath, as if struggling to find the right words. "It's hard for me, Liv. Every day I put my life on the line, and sometimes I feel like people don't appreciate that. They see me as the enemy because of my badge. And when you talk about the police like they're the problem, it hurts. I'm just trying to keep people safe." Olivia nodded, hearing the pain in his voice. "I'm not blaming you, Joshua. I know you're a good man, but you have to understand that there are people who aren't treated fairly, who don't feel safe. That's why I'm out there, trying to make a difference." He looked away, as if grappling with an internal battle. "I don't know if I can ever fully understand, Liv. I see things through a different lens." Olivia reached out, taking his hand. "I don't need you to understand everything, Joshua. I just need you to trust me. Trust that I'm not trying to undermine you or your work. I just want to stand up for what I believe is right." Joshua met her gaze, and for the first time, Olivia thought she saw a glimmer of acceptance. He squeezed her hand, though his face still held traces of doubt. "I'll try, Olivia. I'll try to see things your way." They sat in silence, hands intertwined, a tentative peace settling between them. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a start. And as Olivia left his apartment that night, she felt a sliver of hope, clinging to the possibility that they could find a way forward together, even if it meant navigating a path full of uncertainties. For a few weeks, Olivia clung to the hope that her heart-to-heart with Joshua had planted seeds of understanding. Their conversations grew less tense, and she tried to focus on rebuilding the warmth that once defined their relationship. However, despite Joshua's promise to try to see things her way, Olivia sensed that his willingness was superficial, a promise made to appease her, rather than a genuine shift in perspective. One Friday evening, after a long week, they planned a quiet night in. Olivia had brought over a few movies, eager to spend a simple, relaxing evening with him. But as they flipped through channels and browsed streaming options, a news story flashed across the screen about a recent protest in their city that had turned tense when police had been deployed. Olivia's attention was immediately captured, the images and reports stirring both her concern and curiosity. She glanced at Joshua, hoping they could watch the report together, maybe even have a meaningful conversation about it. But she was met with a familiar frown. "Do we really have to watch this?" Joshua muttered, looking visibly annoyed. "It's important to me, Joshua," Olivia replied gently. "I want to know what happened." He sighed, leaning back on the couch with his arms crossed. Same story, different day. People making trouble, cops trying to keep order. It's exhausting. Olivia felt her stomach knot. She knew his opinion hadn't changed, but she had hoped he would at least try to listen without judgment. "They're not just making trouble, Joshua. They're trying to be heard, to bring attention to issues that matter. By causing chaos, putting innocent people in harm's way." He shot back, his voice tinged with frustration. "I don't understand how you can be okay with that, Liv." "I never said I was okay with violence," she replied, struggling to keep her voice calm. "But peaceful protests aren't the same as chaos. People are out there trying to make a difference because they feel they have no other choice." Joshua rolled his eyes, and Olivia felt the familiar ache of frustration and hurt rise within her. "If you just stop seeing everything as black and white, maybe you'd understand that things aren't as simple as you think they are," he added, his tone dismissive. "That's not fair," Olivia replied, her voice trembling. You think I don't understand because I'm not a cop? You think I'm naive because I believe in change? It's not about you being naive, he said, looking away. It's about you not seeing the risks. You're out there, protesting like it's some noble cause. But you don't know what really goes on in those situations. Her patience snapped. I don't know? Joshua, do you realize how insulting that is? Just because I'm not wearing a uniform doesn't mean I don't understand the world. The room fell silent as the tension thickened. Joshua's jaw clenched, and Olivia could see a hardness in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. You're putting yourself at risk, and I can't just sit by and watch, he said quietly, his voice like steel. Olivia felt a chill run through her, realizing the depth of his conviction. She took a steadying breath, her heart pounding with the weight of her own words. Maybe, if you can't see me for who I am, then maybe you're not the person I thought you were. Her words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Joshua looked at her, his expression shifting from anger to something unreadable. And in that moment, Olivia knew they had reached a breaking point, an invisible line that couldn't be crossed back over. The man she had loved for so long was now a stranger, bound by beliefs that she couldn't change. Without another word, she stood up, her hands shaking as she gathered her things. Joshua didn't stop her. He merely watched as she left, a distance between them that now felt insurmountable. As she closed the door behind her, Olivia felt the weight of finality settle in, knowing that love alone was no longer enough to bridge the divide. The days following their breakup were a blur of quiet mornings and restless nights for Olivia. Her heart felt heavy, carrying the ache of unspoken words and broken hopes. She tried to distract herself with work and spending time with friends, but Joshua lingered in her thoughts, his absence like a shadow she couldn't shake. She replayed their last conversation over and over, wondering if there was something she could have said or done to prevent things from unraveling the way they did. A week later, Olivia found herself driving home from a gathering with friends, the city lights casting a soft glow over her car's interior. The night was cool, and the streets were calm, a gentle quiet that contrasted sharply with the storm inside her. She couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and relief. While she missed Joshua, she knew that letting go had been the right choice. She deserved someone who valued her beliefs and trusted her decisions, even if they didn't always see eye to eye. As she drove, her phone buzzed in the passenger seat. She glanced over, spotting Joshua's name on the screen. Her heart leapt, but she forced herself to keep her focus on the road. After a moment, her phone buzzed again with a text notification, then again, followed by a third. Olivia pulled over to the side of the road, curiosity and a touch of apprehension building inside her. She picked up her phone, hesitating before unlocking it. The messages from Joshua were short and to the point. We need to talk. Please, Olivia. I'm outside your apartment. A mix of confusion and irritation swirled within her. She hadn't expected to hear from him, let alone for him to show up at her place unannounced. She thought about ignoring him, but something inside urged her to go. Maybe there was something he needed to say, something she needed to hear. Taking a deep breath, Olivia put her car back in gear and drove the remaining few blocks to her apartment. She spotted Joshua's car parked out front, and as she stepped out of her own, he emerged from his car, hands in his pockets, looking as tense as she felt. They stood in silence for a moment, the cool night air amplifying the awkwardness between them. Joshua broke the silence first, his voice subdued. Thank you for coming. Olivia nodded, crossing her arms as a shield against the vulnerability she felt. I didn't know what to think when you texted. He took a step closer, his face softened by the streetlight. I know we left things unfinished. I wanted to see you, to talk, maybe clear the air. She looked at him, her heart tightening. Joshua, we've been down this road so many times. I don't know if there's anything left to say. He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. I know I've hurt you, and I know I haven't understood you the way you needed me to. But this past week, it's made me realize that I was wrong. About a lot of things. His words hit her harder than she'd expected, and she felt her defenses faltering. She swallowed, trying to keep her voice steady. Joshua, I loved you. But love isn't enough if we can't respect each other's choices, each other's truths. I need someone who, he interrupted softly, who trusts you. His eyes held a sincerity she hadn't seen in a long time. I want to be that person for you, Liv. I know it's not something I can fix overnight, but I'm willing to try, if you'll let me. Olivia's heart ached, torn between the love she still felt for him and the hurt that lingered from all the arguments, the doubts, the dismissals. She took a deep breath, searching his face, trying to gauge if he was truly ready to change, or if this was just another empty promise. Joshua, she whispered, her voice barely audible, if you're serious, then you have to understand that this isn't just about me. It's about what we stand for, what we believe in. You have to be willing to see things differently. He nodded, stepping closer, his gaze unwavering. I'm ready to try, Liv. I'm ready to see the world through your eyes, even if it's uncomfortable. Just, please give me a chance. In the stillness of the night, Olivia felt a small glimmer of hope flicker within her, fragile yet persistent. She didn't know if they could rebuild what had been broken, but for the first time, she sensed that he was willing to meet her halfway. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. Over the next few days, Olivia found herself replaying Joshua's words from that night. His promise to try, to see things from her perspective, had touched her in a way she hadn't expected. But a part of her remained cautious, reluctant to dive back into the relationship without seeing any real change. She needed more than promises. She needed action, a tangible shift that showed he was ready to put his words into practice. Joshua seemed to sense this as he gave her space, only texting her occasionally and keeping his messages light and thoughtful. Olivia appreciated the subtlety, and slowly, they started exchanging more frequent texts, each message carrying a hint of warmth that had been absent for so long. But Olivia knew that they couldn't keep dancing around the issues forever. Eventually, they would need to confront the cracks in their foundation and decide if they were truly willing to build something stronger together. One evening, Joshua texted, suggesting they meet for coffee at a small cafe they used to frequent when they first started dating. It was a cozy spot, tucked away from the bustling streets, where they had shared countless conversations and laughs. The thought of returning there filled Olivia with a mix of nostalgia and nervousness, but she agreed. She wanted to see him, to understand if he was truly ready to make the changes he had promised. When she arrived, Joshua was already there, waiting for her at a small table by the window. He looked up as she walked in, his face lighting up with a genuine smile that made her heart skip a beat. She returned the smile, her nerves easing slightly as she sat down across from him. Thanks for coming, he said, his tone warm but serious. I think we both needed this, Olivia replied, feeling a sense of purpose settle within her. We can't keep going back and forth, Joshua. If we're going to do this, it has to be different this time. He nodded, looking down at his hands before meeting her gaze. I know, Liv. I know I've been stubborn. And I know I haven't really listened to you the way I should have. He paused, his expression thoughtful. I've been doing a lot of thinking since we last talked. About us, about the things you've been trying to tell me. Olivia leaned forward, listening intently, wanting to hear him out without interruption. I've spent so long looking at things from only my perspective, convinced that my way of seeing the world was right. But this past week, I started reading, watching some of the documentaries you told me about, and I realized that I've been shutting myself off from understanding things I should have been open to from the start. The sincerity in his voice made Olivia's chest tighten. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the openness that had been missing before. I know it's not enough to just say I'll change, he continued, but I want you to know that I'm willing to put in the work. Not just for us, but for me. I want to understand your world. Liv. I want to learn about the things that matter to you and make them matter to me too. Olivia felt a warmth spread through her, a cautious yet hopeful feeling. Joshua, that means a lot to me, more than you know. But you have to understand that this is a journey, and it's not always going to be easy. There will be times when we disagree, when we see things differently. But if we can respect each other's experiences, I believe we can find common ground. He nodded, his face softening. I know, and I want to be that person for you, Liv. I don't want to lose you because I was too stubborn to grow. They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the cafe fading into the background as they held each other's gaze. For the first time in months, Olivia felt a glimmer of hope, a feeling that maybe they could rebuild the trust and love they had almost lost. She reached out, covering his hand with hers. If you're willing to try, then so am I. A small smile tugged at his lips, and he squeezed her hand gently. One step at a time? One step at a time, she agreed, feeling the weight of their shared history settle comfortably between them. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a beginning. A decision to face the future together, no matter how uncertain. The renewed commitment between Olivia and Joshua brought an unexpected calm to their relationship. For the first time, Olivia felt a real sense of hope, seeing Joshua make an effort to listen and learn. He asked questions about her perspective, attended a local community event with her, and even joined discussions on issues he used to avoid. Olivia was careful to guard her heart, knowing that meaningful change takes time, but she found herself smiling more, trusting a little more. But one evening, that tentative trust was shattered. Olivia had been out with friends, celebrating a friend's promotion at a small restaurant downtown. The night was filled with laughter, stories, and the joy of reconnecting. As she prepared to leave, she texted Joshua to let him know she'd be heading home soon. His response was immediate and warm. Drive safe. Let me know when you're back. Felt comforting, grounding. She smiled, pocketed her phone, and stepped outside. As she made her way to her car parked on a dimly lit side street, a police cruiser pulled up nearby. She barely paid it any attention, lost in thoughts of her night and how she'd tell Joshua about it. But as she reached her car, she heard someone call her name. Olivia Green. A voice called, firm and authoritative. Startled, she turned around, recognizing the familiar figure stepping out of the cruiser. It was Joshua in uniform, his face shadowed but unmistakably tense. Olivia's heart skipped a beat, confused as to why he was there. She hadn't expected him to be on duty in this area, nor had she anticipated his tone to be so formal. Joshua? What's going on? She asked, her voice tentative. He took a step toward her, his posture stiff and controlled. Olivia, I received a report about someone matching your description acting suspiciously in this area. Her confusion deepened. Suspiciously? Joshua, I was just out with friends, celebrating a promotion. I texted you. You know where I was? Joshua's face remained hard, unreadable. I have to take any report seriously, Liv. This area has been flagged recently, and I need to confirm that everything is in order. Olivia's pulse quickened, a sense of dread settling in her stomach. This wasn't the man she knew. He was looking at her as though she were a stranger, someone he had no connection with. Joshua, you know me. You know this is absurd. Please, cooperate, he said firmly, the authority in his tone chilling. I just need you to answer a few questions. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest, anger and betrayal boiling within her. This was her boyfriend, someone who claimed to love and understand her, yet here he was, treating her like a suspect. She swallowed, forcing her voice to remain calm. Fine. What do you need to know? As he asked her routine questions about where she'd been and who she was with, Olivia felt a growing sense of humiliation. People passing by slowed, watching the interaction with curious glances, and she could feel the weight of their stares. A part of her wanted to walk away, but she couldn't believe that Joshua would go through with this charade. Finally, after a grueling few minutes, Joshua ended his questioning. But he didn't leave it at that. With a hardened expression, he reached for his radio. I'm going to need backup, he said flatly. Olivia's shock turned to horror. Joshua, what are you doing? I haven't done anything wrong. He looked at her, his eyes devoid of the warmth she'd come to know. I'm just following protocol. We can't make exceptions, even if we know the person. The betrayal stung deeper than she'd imagined possible. Olivia felt her legs tremble as she stood there, stunned and speechless. Her mind raced, questioning every moment they had shared, every promise he'd made. In that instant, she realized that the man standing before her wasn't the person she had hoped he could become. This was the real Joshua, the officer who valued his authority over their relationship, who would let protocol erase his humanity. As another officer arrived, Olivia felt a cold detachment settle over her. She answered their questions, compliant but numb. The painful irony wasn't lost on her. The man she thought was finally starting to understand her had just turned her worst fear into reality. And as they let her go with a terse warning, Olivia walked away without a word, knowing that the fragile trust they had been rebuilding had just been irrevocably broken. Back in her apartment, Olivia sat in the silence, her mind racing and her heart heavy with disbelief. She kept replaying the encounter, each moment like a fresh wound. Joshua's cold, detached face as he questioned her. The weight of his words that felt more like accusations than concern. She had trusted him, believed that they were on a path to understanding, to healing. But tonight, she had seen something she couldn't unsee. The man who claimed to love her had used his power to humiliate her, to make her feel small and insignificant. She felt like a stranger in her own life, questioning everything about their relationship, every promise he'd made. The ringing of her phone jolted her, and she glanced at the screen. It was Joshua. For a brief second, her heart hesitated, torn between anger and the faintest hope for an apology. But then clarity washed over her. She silenced the phone, letting it ring out in the quiet of her apartment, and sank back into the stillness, realizing that there were some betrayals love couldn't mend. Days passed, but the ache inside Olivia remained as raw as ever. She went through her routine in a daze, replaying every memory, every conversation with Joshua, searching for signs she might have missed. She couldn't shake the humiliation, the feeling of being reduced to a mere suspect in his eyes, all because he valued his badge over their bond. Messages from Joshua came and went, each one left unread. Her friends noticed her quietness, her withdrawal, and offered support, though she kept the details vague. She wasn't ready to share the full story. Speaking it out loud would make it feel even more real. One evening, Mia, her closest friend, finally sat her down. "Liv, you've been carrying this alone. Whatever happened with Joshua, you don't have to keep it bottled up." Olivia looked at her, her eyes filling with unshed tears. He made me feel like a criminal, Mia. All that talk about understanding, about change, it was all a lie. When it came down to it, he saw me as just another suspect." Mia wrapped her arms around Olivia, her presence a small comfort. And in that embrace, Olivia realized that letting go of Joshua was not just about love lost. It was about reclaiming herself. The pain of Joshua's betrayal lingered, but with each passing day, Olivia felt a new strength rising within her. The experience had scarred her, yet it had also clarified what she wanted and needed in her life. She was done trying to change someone who couldn't see her worth, who couldn't respect her values. One afternoon, she sat down with a notebook and pen, pouring out her thoughts, her anger, her sadness. She wrote about the injustice she had felt, the way Joshua's treatment had shattered her trust. Each word felt like a release, a shedding of the hurt that had clung to her. As she wrote, she began to understand that her love for justice, her fight for equality, was more than a passion. It was her purpose. And anyone who could not support that would only hold her back. Later that evening, she posted a message on social media, a brief yet powerful reflection on reclaiming one's worth. "Sometimes the hardest lesson is realizing that love isn't enough if respect is missing," she wrote. She felt lighter, freer, and as she closed her notebook, Olivia knew she was stepping into a new chapter, one in which she would never settle for less than she deserved. With her thoughts finally clear, Olivia started reconnecting with the people and causes that had always lifted her spirit. She attended community meetings, joined workshops, and found herself surrounded by others who shared her passion for justice. These gatherings reminded her of her purpose and reignited her desire to make a difference. One evening, during a panel discussion, Olivia found the courage to share her story. Speaking out about her experience with Joshua, she described the subtle erosion of trust, the pain of being treated as a suspect by someone she loved. Her voice shook at first, but as she continued, she felt the strength in her words, the power of her own truth. When she finished, The audience was silent, each face reflecting understanding and empathy. Someone in the crowd called out, "Thank you for sharing that." It's a reminder that we all deserve respect, no matter who we are or who we're with. As the crowd applauded, Olivia felt a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in a long time. She was no longer defined by Joshua's betrayal, but by her own resilience, her determination to use her voice for change. In that moment, Olivia knew she was finally free. As Olivia continued sharing her story and advocating for justice, her confidence blossomed. She became a regular speaker at events and panels, her voice resonating with those who had faced similar struggles. Her story of love turned to betrayal, and the journey of reclaiming herself resonated deeply, and people reached out to thank her for her courage. One evening after an event, a young woman approached her, eyes filled with gratitude. "Your story gave me the courage to walk away from a relationship that was holding me back," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you for showing me it's okay to demand respect." Olivia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She realized that by standing in her truth, she was not only healing herself but inspiring others to do the same. As she walked home that night, she felt the weight of her past lifting, replaced by a new strength. She no longer looked back at her relationship with regret, but with the understanding that it had shaped her into the woman she was now. Olivia knew her purpose was no longer tied to proving her worth to anyone else but to honoring her own journey and helping others find their voice. With each event and every story she shared, Olivia became more unapologetically herself. She found comfort in her own skin, embracing the journey that had led her here, scars and all. Her experiences had not broken her. They had refined her, illuminating her purpose and her strength. One afternoon, as she sat in a cafe preparing notes for an upcoming talk, she spotted a familiar face at the door. It was Joshua, looking uncertain as he approached her table. Her heart didn't skip a beat like it once would have. Instead, she felt a calm acceptance. "Olivia," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much I hurt you until I saw the impact of my actions through your words." He looked genuinely remorseful, and for a moment, Olivia saw the man she once loved. She nodded, offering a small, forgiving smile. "Thank you, Joshua. I appreciate that. But I've moved on." As he walked away, Olivia felt a sense of closure settle over her, warm and satisfying. She had no regrets, only gratitude for the strength she had discovered in herself. And as she returned to her notes, she knew her future was hers alone to define. New beginnings. With the final chapter of her past now closed, Olivia threw herself wholeheartedly into her future. Her journey had taught her resilience, self-worth, and the importance of standing firm in her beliefs. She joined a community organization dedicated to social justice, using her voice to uplift others who needed encouragement and direction. At one of her events, she met Aiden, a fellow activist with a warm smile and a genuine passion for change. Their connection was immediate, but Olivia approached it with caution, allowing herself the space and time to truly understand this new chapter. Aiden respected her boundaries, admired her journey, and, more importantly, shared her values. Slowly, her heart softened, and she found herself opening up to the possibility of love once more. One evening, as they wrapped up a community project, Aiden turned to her and said, "Olivia, your story and your strength inspire me every day. I feel lucky to know you." For the first time, Olivia felt what it was like to be valued, respected, and seen for who she truly was. Smiling, she took his hand, knowing that her journey had led her to a place where she could finally embrace love and life on her own terms. With Aiden by her side, Olivia's life felt fuller than it ever had. Together, they worked on community projects, blending their skills and passion to create meaningful change. She had found not just a partner but a true ally, someone who shared her vision and respected her journey. One evening, as they led a workshop on social justice, Olivia noticed how her voice no longer held traces of the past pain. Instead, it carried strength, compassion, and conviction. She shared her story openly, not as a wound but as a testimony of growth and resilience. After the workshop, a young woman approached her, eyes bright with inspiration. "Thank you for your honesty, Olivia. Hearing you speak makes me feel like I can overcome anything." Olivia smiled, touched by the impact of her words. She had come a long way from the woman who once doubted her voice and worth. Now, she was a mentor, an advocate, and a role model, helping others find strength in their own stories. Later that night, as she walked home with Aiden, Olivia felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had embraced her past, transformed her pain, and now flourished in her purpose. A purpose she had claimed all on her own. With each new project, Olivia found herself stepping further into a role she hadn't anticipated. A leader in her community. People looked up to her not only for her passion but for the authenticity she brought to every conversation. Her journey had equipped her with empathy and insight, qualities that others found both comforting and inspiring. One day, Olivia was invited to speak at a citywide conference on social justice and community reform. As she stood backstage, waiting for her name to be announced, she felt a familiar rush of nerves. But this time it was different. Instead of anxiety, she felt purpose. When she walked onto the stage, the crowd greeted her with warm applause. She shared her story, but this time it wasn't about her past heartbreak. It was about the resilience she had built, the life she had crafted, and the love and support she now surrounded herself with. She spoke of unity, respect, and the power of standing up for one's beliefs. The applause was thunderous as she finished, but what mattered most was the sense of fulfillment in her heart. Olivia had become more than a survivor of her experiences. She was now a voice for change, using her journey to light the way for others. As Olivia stepped off the stage, she was greeted by a crowd of supporters, each one eager to share how her story had inspired them. She smiled warmly, offering words of encouragement, each interaction reaffirming her purpose and the impact of her journey. It was a humbling experience, knowing that the challenges she'd faced had led her to this moment of connection and empowerment. Aiden approached her with a proud grin, holding out a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked himself. "You were incredible up there," he said, admiration shining in his eyes. "Thank you," Olivia replied, feeling a surge of gratitude. "I never imagined I'd be here, sharing my story with so many people. Feels right." Together, they walked through the bustling conference hall, hand in hand, as Olivia reflected on the path that had brought her here. Her life had been redefined, not by the heartbreak she had endured, but by the strength she had found within herself. She had turned her pain into purpose, her setbacks into steps toward a future filled with hope and possibility. As they left the hall, Olivia took one last look at the crowd behind her, a smile spreading across her face. Her past no longer held her back. It had propelled her forward, allowing her to redefine her life on her own terms. In that moment, Olivia knew she had finally come home to herself, a place of peace, purpose, and endless potential.